Welcome back, Commanders. My name is Alcrest, and today I'll be briefing you on your brand new T-Doll, the super cute and adorable Papasha. Papasha is a Sentinel SMG wielder that uses her robot, the City Warden, to help her out on the battlefield. The two buff and cover each other to help each other out. Her playstyle is very unique, and her kit is based around taking down large enemies. I will mention that in all my guides, I'll be referring to Confectant's Index of skill points, since this is much easier to understand. Papasha's skill point generation is tied to a passive, United Guard. She will earn 1 skill point if either she or the City Warden deal damage, earning 2 if they both did. She will summon the City Warden at the start of combat to a tile adjacent to her. I have decided to test this multiple times, and the City Guard spawn doesn't seem to have a preset direction it comes out on. If someone is in that tile, he will spawn in the next tile instead. It is kind of an odd thing, as you can reset spam to get a more ideal spawn location. The last part of a passive is that if one of them land a crit, the other will get a plus 20 crit rate on the next attack. This effect goes both ways. Next, I'll talk about the City Warden itself. The City Warden copies all of Papasha's stats, but with 80% of Papasha's HP, and both crit values are lowered to base. I think it's kind of strange why they decided to show it like this, instead of just indicating it copies the attack and defense stat, but who knows. It is non-controllable and will act on its own based on its 2 passives. Firstly, counter-terrorism support will perform a support attack to anything Papasha attacks, dealing 3 stability and physical damage equal to 80% of her attack. This has infinite range and will do this no matter where it is. The only condition is that it has line of sight to the target, so no walls or tall obstacles can be in the way. Secondly, explosive preventive measure. This passive has quite a few hindering effects. After Papasha's turn, the City Warden will do its best to look for a place to hide behind cover. It will still try, even if it can't immediately reach one. This passive also prevents any direct healing. It will heal 10% of his HP whenever Papasha receives healing, and the Warden cannot be shielded in any way. When the City Warden dies, it will go into self-repair. It cannot be targetable, cannot act, and cannot receive any damage for 2 turns. After which, he will come back at full HP and brand new. Now we can go back to Papasha. Papasha's basic attack is Warning Shot. It has 6 range, deals physical damage equal to 60% of her attack, and reduces stability by 3. Papasha's active skill 1 is Honor Guard, which costs 2 skill points. It targets one enemy in 6 tiles and does an AoE to adjacent tiles, dealing physical damage to 60% of her attack and reducing their stability by 2. If the targeted enemy's stability does not break, the City Warden will gain a buff for 3 turns, called Courage to Endure, which increases his support attack by 30%. City Warden itself will only attack the selected target and not anything else caught in the AoE. Papasha's active skill 2 is Joint Breakthrough, which costs 4 skill points. She cleanses 2 debuffs from herself, and any debuff from the City Warden that restricts commands or frigid. She then teleports the City Warden to a tile up to 6 tiles away. It then attacks the closest enemy to Papasha, dealing physical damage equal to 150% of his attack, or 200% if it's a large target. It will not move this turn, and this skill cannot be used if the City Warden is under repair. Papasha's ultimate is Heart of Protection, which has a 2-turn cooldown. She deals physical damage equal to 150% of her attack, and reduces their stability by 3. The City Warden will immediately gain random attack buffs based on how many buffs Papasha has, up to 2 buffs and lasting 2 turns. Papasha will also grant another buff to the City Warden called Tenacity to Withstand, which also lasts 2 turns. This buff increases damage dealt depending on the target's remaining HP. When deploying Papasha into the field, the key element to playing her is understanding how the City Warden will act. Her damage multipliers aren't very impressive on her own, and won't do much damage without the City Warden following up, so keeping it alive is very important, and selecting the right targets to be able to regain 2 skill points per turn. Her active skill 2 can teleport her City Warden behind enemies to avoid cover bonuses. Also, because it has no maximum range, she can drop it anywhere and it will still shoot the distance. Her niche is against large bosses, as she will get a variety of bonuses from attacking anything classified as large. You can check if an enemy is large by selecting them and checking their battle traits, though honestly the game makes it kinda obvious what are large enemies. Anything large can't really hide behind cover either, so you don't need to worry about things like line of sight with the City Warden. When it comes to a rotation, start with active skill 1. Ideally, you use this against an enemy that will not stability break, so that the City Warden can get courage to endure for 3 turns. It doesn't matter if it dies, just as long as the stability doesn't break. Turn 2 you can use ultimate, who will get 3 buffs lasting 2 turns, and turn 3 you can use active skill 2 to reposition and attack the enemy with full buffs. Assuming the City Warden can attack each turn to provide enough skill points, you can repeat this for a second cycle. Even so, Papasha will inevitably run out of skill points, and you will need to slip in a basic attack every so often. On to our pros and cons. You can be pretty creative with how you approach enemies. By dropping the Warden behind enemies, he can snipe enemies without cover protection. She is a completely free doll. As long as you're participating in platoon activities, you will eventually earn enough for a signature weapon and max fortifications. If you need to divert enemies or damage away from your dolls, you can drop the City Warden in a place for it to be intentionally targeted. This is a lot better because he comes back after 2 turns, rather than leaving the field like if any of your other dolls get taken out. As for her cons, a lot of the kit ties around the City Warden, and unfortunately, it dies pretty easily and cannot be healed directly. It is very difficult to keep the Warden alive. For example, if there is a Grand AoE, he will just stand there. Unless you have active skill 2 available, there's not much you can do about it. At the end of the day, she requires more planning to play optimally. And sometimes it's just easier to use another Sentinel doll that just goes blasting enemies. She doesn't have any phase element attacks, and only gets a phase bonus from light ammo weakness. She can technically double dip though, as both her and the City Warden attacks have light ammo attribute. Her best weapon is Savarog. This was catered to Papasha and only Papasha. His trait increases damage dealt by 5% for each debuff the target has, up to a 20% cap. Its effect, Gilding Glory, increases the City Warden's damage by 15%. After any allied unit uses their support attack, the crit rate of their next attack is increased by 10%, capping at 30. If you get the Battle Pass, you can use the Certified Manuscript. Its trait grants 2 extra movement next turn, as long as they have moved to 5 this turn. Battle Rush ignores 5% defense for each tile Papasha moves this turn, capping at 5 tiles. Each tile moved after 5 will remove 1 buff from the target. You can use Papasha's namesake if you want a cheaper option from the platoon shop. It has the same trait as Savarog, increasing damage dealt based on each debuff, and high priority target increases damage dealt to large enemies by 10%. If you just need something to pass by, you can use the MP7. It shares the same trait as the Classified Manuscript, and when Papasha uses ult, she will gain Fruitful Innovation, buffing her next skill by 10%. Her attachments are the same as any other DPS, focusing on attack percent, attack, crit rate, and then crit damage. Reminder that the only attachment that can have crit damage is the muzzle. The set you're looking for is the physical boost. Because all of her attacks are physical, this is the only set that she benefits from. When it comes to her fixed keys, her best 3 are 201, Glory with Us. Active skill 1 will do 20% more damage, and the City Warden will reduce the stability by another 2. 401, Unwavering Conviction. This prevents the City Warden from moving at all, but will permanently increase its attack by 10%. And 403, Final Assault. When you use active skill 2 to teleport the City Warden, if he lands on a location not within 3 tiles of an enemy, the damage dealt will be increased by 10%. Her other fixed keys are situational. 203, Vow to Defend, is a good one if you struggle to keep the City Warden alive. And 603, Strength and Unity, increases the attack by 10% to the one of the pair that has less attack at the start of the turn. I'd skip 601 as I don't see many use cases for it. Her common key is Brilliant Metal, increasing attack by 5%. It increases damage from allied support skills by 10% but only once per turn. Other common keys you can steal is Vepli's Heart Melting Strike. She will get this buff as long as she's using Classified Manuscript. Tololo's Afterglow increases damage dealt when skill points is below max would also be good. Otherwise, any common key that increases attack that you have available would work. Next, we'll have a quick look at her fortifications. At V1, City Warden Self-Repair will only be 1 turn. It will heal 20% instead of only 10%, and it will gain Courage to Endure regardless if the enemy's stability breaks or not, and will ignore 30% of defense of large enemies when he performs his support attacks while he has this buff. This greatly improves the City Warden's shortcomings, as a 1-turn downtime is a huge difference. At V2, Papasha can teleport the City Warden to anywhere on the map with her active skill 2. It then attacks the closest target to Papasha as normal, and then another shot to the closest enemy to it. The first shot is always guaranteed to be a crit. At V3, City Warden will spawn with 30% extra crit rate and 20% extra crit damage. Papasha will also start with 3 stacks of Power of Unity. This buff increases damage by 10% per stack and caps at 3 stacks. She also gains a stack at the end of each turn. However, all stacks are lost whenever she changes targets. At V4, her ultimate gets enhanced. Effects of Tenacity to Withstand is buffed. The City Warden will now receive 3 buffs, and each buff is enhanced. Each stack of Power of Unity from a V3 also counts as 1 buff. At V5, City Warden gains Security Monitoring. This will counter-attack any enemy once per turn. And at V6, City Warden gains Tenacity to Withstand from the start of the battle, and when using ult, City Warden also gains Resolve to Defend. This allows a second counter attack per turn, and each time a target is hit, they receive 5% more damage. To finish off, we'll have a quick look at suitable teammates to field along Papasha. For sub DPS, Mosin works well with Papasha, as she has strong stability damage along with her City Warden. Or you can run QJ if you have Papasha's weapon Sarog, as this will buff QJ's crit rate. For sustain, you can run Xiaomi. She's just a good pick in general, but she doesn't actually help the City Warden at all. Better sustains would be Cheetah, as she can apply buffs to Papasha and the City Warden. Ksenia works too, as her heals also apply buffs. For the flex spot, both Sabrina and Groza's defensive buff also work on the City Warden. Here are some examples of team compositions. Papasha is pretty flexible with the current roster, as no one else really plays into her niche. And that about wraps up this character briefing for Papasha. I hope this guide helps, and if you have any other suggestions on a build or teammates, make sure to leave a comment below. Until next time, Commanders.